my son threw me out of my own house. I stood there, suitcase in hand, as he changed the locks. The rain started to fall, soaking through my thin jacket as I watched my only child turn the key that locked me out of my life. The smirk on his face as he demanded my keys revealed everything. This wasn't about helping me after I lost my job. It was a calculated takeover. He'd been waiting for this moment, planning it for months, maybe years. Ever been betrayed by family? Comment below. Rain began to fall harder as I clutched my single suitcase, containing only the essentials he'd generously allowed me to pack. 30 years of motherhood, reduced to one bag. My clothes, a few toiletries, and the small photo album I'd grabbed when he wasn't looking. Everything else, my memories, my kitchen tools, my mother's china, all of it was now his. "The house is in my name now, Mom," he said, standing beside his designer-dressed wife. "You should be thankful I let you take anything at all." His voice was cold, businesslike, like he was talking to a stranger, not the woman who had rocked him to sleep, bandaged his knees, worked extra shifts to pay for his braces. I'd raised Brandon alone since he was 12, after his father died leaving us with nothing but debt. Every sacrifice I made was for him. Every extra hour worked, every dinner made from scratch to save money, every vacation I never took so he could go to summer camp. And now here I was, standing in the rain, homeless at 58. The night before, he'd arrived unannounced with documents. "Sign these, Mom. It's for your own good," he'd said, his voice rehearsed with false concern. I remember how he wouldn't meet my eyes, how he kept glancing at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. When I hesitated, his wife Melissa rolled her eyes. "You can't afford the property taxes anymore," she said. "Brandon is saving you from yourself." She stood there in her designer boots that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, looking around my modest living room with barely disguised contempt. I signed because I was exhausted. 3 months unemployed after 15 years at the same company had worn me down. The constant worry, the sleepless nights, the growing pile of bills. I never imagined he'd demand I leave immediately. I thought I'd have time to pack properly, to say goodbye to the home where I'd raised him, to find a place of my own. Amy arrived within 20 minutes of my desperate call. Her car pulled up just as Brandon closed the curtains on the home I'd paid off 5 years ago, a fact I never shared with him. She saw me standing there, drenched and defeated, and the look on her face changed from concern to fury. "You'll regret this," Amy shouted at the house. I touched her arm, silently urging restraint. This wasn't the time. Not yet. Her dark eyes flashed with anger, but she nodded, understanding that public confrontation wouldn't help me now. "Let's go," I whispered. The family photos I wasn't allowed to take burning in my memory. The Thanksgiving portrait where Brandon's smile never reached his eyes. The graduation photos where he'd rushed away immediately after for a party, leaving me to drive home alone. The wedding picture where I stood at the edge, barely included, while Melissa's family took center stage. In Amy's guest room that night, I didn't cry. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked the account that Brandon knew nothing about. The numbers glowed back at me, reassuring in their stability. 6 figures that represented years of careful planning, of quiet suspicion, of maternal instinct that had warned me this day might come. "You need to tell him now," Amy urged as she set down a cup of tea. "Show him the account. Show him you're not destitute." Her voice was firm but kind, her eyes still blazing with the righteous anger of a true friend. I shook my head. "Not yet. He needs to believe he's won." Amy didn't understand, but she hadn't watched the subtle changes in her child the way I had in mine. She hadn't seen the gradual transformation from a boy who once made me Mother's Day cards into a man who checked his watch while I talked. For years, I'd noticed the little things. How Brandon stopped calling unless he needed something. How holiday visits shortened from weekends to single afternoons. How his questions focused on my house, my retirement plans, what I planned to do with my stuff when I was older, never asking about my dreams, my happiness, my life. The first red flag came after Robert's death. 10-year-old Brandon asked about insurance money before asking about the funeral. I dismissed it as a child's confusion about death, his attempt to make sense of the chaos by focusing on practical matters. Now I wonder if that moment was the first glimpse of who he would become. Then came college, where my sacrifices were met with demands for more. "Everyone else has a new car," he'd complained during sophomore year, unaware I was working 2 jobs to cover his tuition and apartment. He never questioned how we afforded his education after his father left us with nothing. He simply took, expected, demanded. What would you do if your child saw you only as a resource, not a person? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'd hoped marriage would mature him. Instead, Melissa reinforced his worst qualities. Together, they viewed my modest lifestyle as an embarrassment rather than evidence of my sacrifices. They'd visit and make subtle comments about my dated furniture or basic television, never considering that I chose simple living to secure our future. His future. 3 years ago, during a rare visit, I overheard them in the kitchen. "Once the house is ours, we'll finally have the down payment for the lake property," Melissa had whispered. I stood frozen in the hallway, glass of water in hand, as my son replied, "I know. Just a few more years before she'll need assisted living. Then we can sell it." They were planning their future with my assets while I was in the next room, still very much alive, still very much independent. That night, I opened my first separate account. Not because I wanted to hide my assets, but because I finally accepted what my heart had known for years. My son saw me as a means to an end, a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. It broke my heart to take such precautions, but maternal love can be clear-eyed even when it's painful. Every extra dollar went into that account. I lived even more frugally, while Brandon assumed I was struggling. I let him believe it. I stopped buying new clothes, started cutting my own hair, grew vegetables in the backyard, all while secretly building my financial safety net, preparing for the day I now recognized was inevitable. When the corporate downsizing came, I wasn't worried about money. I was worried about what Brandon would do when he thought I was vulnerable. The company gave me a generous severance package that went straight into my secret account. Meanwhile, I told Brandon I'd received nothing but 2 weeks' pay and a potted plant. I was right to be cautious. Within weeks, he was concerned about my financial situation, offering to help by putting the house in his name. For tax purposes, he claimed. For easier estate management, he insisted, always with that concerned smile that never reached his eyes. Amy's guest room became my temporary sanctuary. "You can stay as long as you need," she insisted, unaware that I was already apartment hunting. Her spare room was cozy, with floral curtains and a handmade quilt, but I knew I needed my own space to execute the next phase of my plan. Brandon called once, 3 days after the eviction, not to apologize, but to ask where I'd stored the holiday decorations. Melissa wanted to host Thanksgiving in their new house. Not even a full week had passed, and they were already planning parties in the home they'd taken from me. The betrayal stung afresh with each word. "They're in the attic," I said calmly, "along with the photo albums and my mother's jewelry that you didn't let me take." His silence told me he hadn't expected me to fight back, even verbally. He'd expected tears, begging, brokenness, not this steady resistance. "I'll, set those aside for you," he finally stammered. "You can pick them up sometime." No apology, no acknowledgement of what he'd done, just a grudging concession to return items that were already mine. 2 weeks passed. I found a small apartment and furnished it minimally. A bed from a thrift store, a table and 2 chairs from a garage sale, a single pot, 2 plates, minimal cutlery. From the outside, it looked like I was barely surviving. That's exactly what I wanted Brandon to think. Meanwhile, my secret account had grown enough to buy a house twice the size of my old one, in cash, plus retirement funds that would last decades. The results of 30 years of careful saving and Robert's life insurance that Brandon never knew about. After Robert died, I'd told everyone the policy had lapsed. Another small deception that now protected me from my own child's greed. Know someone who's been underestimated by family? Tell them they're not alone and share this video. The apartment was strategic, close enough to my old neighborhood that news of my struggle would reach Brandon. I even applied for a cashier job at the local grocery store where Melissa shopped. The manager was confused why someone with my administrative experience wanted such a position, but I spun a story about needing flexible hours while I got back on my feet. He hired me on the spot. I worked the register 3 days a week, scanning items with a smile, making small talk with customers. Most treated me like I was invisible, but I didn't mind. Invisibility had its advantages. It let me observe, plan, prepare. She came through my line one Tuesday, her cart filled with expensive items for a dinner party. Imported cheeses, organic vegetables, champagne, prime cuts of meat. The shock on her face when she recognized me was worth the $8 hourly wage. Her perfectly made-up face froze, eyes widening in horror as if I was a ghost from her past. "Carrie, what are you—" Her voice trailed off, eyes darting to make sure no one she knew saw her speaking to the cashier. God forbid her friends discover her husband's mother was working minimum wage. What would the country club set think? "Making ends meet," I replied, scanning her imported cheese. "How's the house? Did you find the Thanksgiving decorations?" I kept my voice pleasant, conversational, as though we were discussing the weather instead of the home they'd stolen. She recovered quickly, plastering on a fake smile. Yes, everything's fine. The house is coming along nicely." She looked at my name tag, at my uniform, at my hands scanning her luxury items, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. The story she'd tell Brandon. The convenient proof of my financial desperation. That night, Brandon called again. "Mom, Melissa said she saw you working at Martin's. You don't need to do that. We can give you a monthly allowance." His voice had that familiar condescending tone, like he was speaking to a child or someone very old and confused. An allowance. From my own house. Using my own money. I bit back what I wanted to say. The words that would expose my plan too soon. That would ruin the lesson I needed him to learn. "That's generous," I replied instead. "Can we discuss it over dinner? Maybe you could invite me to the house for Thanksgiving?" The test was set. Would he welcome me into what had been my home for decades? Would he include me in a holiday I had always hosted? His hesitation told me everything. The pause stretched uncomfortably before he cleared his throat. "Actually, we've made other plans. Melissa's family tradition is to go to her parents." The lie was transparent. They'd already asked about my decorations. They were planning to host in my house, with my silverware, using my recipes, while I sat alone in my rented apartment. "I understand," I said, adding a slight tremble to my voice. "Perhaps another time." I needed him complacent, secure in his victory. The more confident he felt, the greater the impact would be when he learned the truth. The next Sunday, I drove to my old house, arriving just as they were leaving for brunch. The shock on Brandon's face was immediate. He hadn't expected to face me, hadn't prepared his mask of concern. For a moment, I saw the panic in his eyes, the guilt he quickly suppressed. "Mom, what are you doing here?" He blocked the doorway defensively, as if I might try to reclaim my home by force. His body language spoke volumes. This was now his territory, and I was an intruder. "I forgot something important," I said softly. "My mother's recipe book. It was in the kitchen drawer. A treasured item he wouldn't have noticed or valued. Something personal rather than valuable. Something he couldn't accuse me of coming to take for financial reasons." Melissa appeared behind him, freshly dressed for their brunch date, hair perfectly styled, lipstick immaculate. She looked at me like I was a door-to-door salesperson, an inconvenience to be managed and dismissed. "We've reorganized everything," she said coldly. "I don't know where your old things ended up." The message was clear. This wasn't my space anymore. My belongings were now clutter to be reorganized or discarded according to her taste. "Please," I said, allowing my voice to crack. "It's all I have left of her." The performance worked. Brandon, uncomfortable with emotion, let me inside. He always did struggle with genuine feelings. Easier to shut them down, walk away, pretend they didn't exist. Do you think she should have confronted them immediately? What would you have done? Comment below. My house was already transformed. My furniture replaced, walls repainted, family photos gone. 30 years erased in 3 weeks. The living room where I'd nursed Brandon through chickenpox now featured a sleek leather sectional I would never have chosen. The kitchen where I'd taught him to bake cookies now gleamed with stainless steel appliances I'd never use. In the kitchen, Melissa watched me suspiciously as I located the recipe book where I'd always kept it, but I wasn't there for recipes. I knew exactly where it was, in the drawer beside the sink, underneath the pot holders. I just needed a reason to step back into my former life, to plant the seed for what would come next. I was there to plant the seed. "I'm meeting with a financial advisor next week," I mentioned casually. "About Robert's life insurance policy." I kept my voice light, conversational, as though discussing the weather, not laying the bait for my carefully planned trap. Brandon froze in the doorway. "What policy?" "Dad didn't have life insurance." The bait was taken. I could almost see his mind racing, calculating, wondering what asset he might have overlooked. "Of course he did," I said, tucking the recipe book into my bag. "Why do you think we managed after he died? Did you think a secretary's salary paid for your private school and college?" I gave a little laugh, as if the very idea was absurd. Which it was. No administrative assistant's salary could have covered the expenses I'd paid for him over the years. I left them with that thought, thanking them politely for allowing me to retrieve my mother's recipes. In the car, I called Amy. "It's time," I told her. "The pieces are in place." My heart was pounding, but my voice was steady. The endgame was approaching. "Are you sure?" she asked, knowing what this meant. No going back. No reconciliation. A complete break from my only child. "I'm sure," I replied. "He needs to learn this lesson, even if it's the last thing I ever teach him." It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but also the clearest. Sometimes love means allowing consequences, even when it breaks your heart. Brandon called that evening, his voice carefully casual. "About that insurance policy, Mom. Why haven't you used it to support yourself now?" No greeting. No questions about my well-being. Straight to the money. I could practically hear him salivating at the prospect of another asset to claim. "It's complicated," I sighed. "The financial advisor is explaining my options. Maybe you could come to the meeting. You've always been so much better with money than me." I fed his ego, knowing his greed would make him careless. He wouldn't question why his financially naive mother would suddenly trust him after he'd put her out on the street. His eagerness to accept told me everything. "Absolutely, Mom. I'm here to help. Just tell me when and where." The coldness from our last interaction had vanished, replaced by solicitous concern now that he thought there was money to be managed. Or rather, mismanaged into his own pocket. The meeting was set for the following Thursday at First National Bank downtown. Not with a financial advisor, but with the bank president, Amy's brother-in-law, who was happy to help with my plan when she explained the situation. He'd seen too many elderly clients exploited by family members to refuse. That week, Brandon called daily. Checking in, he claimed. But his questions always circled back to the insurance policy. How much was it worth? What were the terms? Was it a lump sum or an annuity? Had I spoken to the advisor again? Each question more transparent than the last. I kept my answers vague. "The banker will explain everything," I assured him. "It's all very technical." I knew it was driving him crazy not to know the details, not to be able to plan how he would separate me from whatever funds he imagined I had. His frustration was palpable even through the phone. The night before our meeting, Melissa called. Not Brandon, but Melissa. "Interesting. We're thinking you should move in with us," she said, false warmth dripping from every word. "The guest room is just sitting empty." Her voice was honey-sweet. Nothing like the cold dismissal when I'd come for my recipe book. The same guest room they couldn't offer when I was standing in the rain with a suitcase. "How thoughtful," I replied. "Let's discuss it after tomorrow's meeting." I wondered if she rehearsed these conversations, practiced sounding sincere when we both knew she was anything but. Did you catch how quickly his attitude changed when he thought money was involved? Have you seen people's true colors emerge like this? Share your experience. Thursday arrived. I dressed carefully in my oldest, most worn outfit. Hair unstyled, minimal makeup. The image of a struggling, dependent mother. The picture they expected to see. The victim they believed me to be. I even added a small tear in my sweater sleeve, as if I couldn't afford to replace worn clothing. Brandon and Melissa arrived at the bank overdressed. matching smiles of anticipation poorly concealed. Melissa in a designer suit, Brandon in expensive leather shoes that squeaked against the marble floor. They looked like what they were, predators scenting blood in the water. Brandon rushed to help me from my old car, suddenly the devoted son, offering his arm, guiding me as if I was infirm rather than perfectly capable. "Let me help you, Mom," he said loudly enough for passers-by to hear. The performance of the dutiful son, carefully crafted for public consumption. "You look tired, Mom," he said, concern masking impatience. "After this is sorted out, you can finally rest." The implication clear: sign whatever we put in front of you, then shuffle off to a quiet corner while we handle everything, while we spend everything. The bank president greeted us in the lobby, addressing me respectfully as Mrs. Lewis. Brandon's eyebrows rose at the deferential treatment. He was used to people dismissing me, talking past me to him as if I couldn't manage my own affairs. This wasn't following the script he had in mind. "We've prepared everything as you requested," the president said, leading us to a private conference room where Amy waited, elegant and imposing in her attorney's suit. She gave me an encouraging nod, her eyes communicating silent support. She understood what this cost me emotionally, this final breaking of family ties. "What's going on?" Brandon demanded, looking between us. "Who is she? I thought we were meeting a financial advisor about Dad's policy." His voice had lost its solicitous tone, edges of irritation breaking through his careful facade. "This is Amy Clark," I said calmly, "my attorney. And we're not here about your father's life insurance." I paused, watching confusion cloud his face. "We're here about my estate." The word estate hung in the air between us, a word that implied assets, wealth, resources beyond what he had imagined. The bank president placed a folder before each of us. "Mrs. Lewis has asked me to provide a complete accounting of her assets," he explained formally. His voice was professional, neutral, but I caught the small flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He'd seen too many cases like mine not to appreciate what was about to happen. Brandon opened his folder, Melissa peering over his shoulder. The color drained from both their faces as they stared at the figures. 6 figures in investment accounts, property holdings, retirement funds. A complete financial picture showing not destitution, but careful planning and prosperity. This is a mistake," Brandon stammered, looking up. "Where would my mother get this kind of money?" His eyes were wide, disbelieving. In his mind, I was the struggling secretary, the financially naive widow, the dependent parent. Not this, a woman with more assets than he had, even after taking my house. "From 30 years of careful planning," I answered. "From investing Robert's actual life insurance, which was substantial. From paying off the house early while letting you believe I still had a mortgage." I kept my voice gentle, matter of fact. This wasn't about anger, though I had every right to it. This was about truth, finally spoken aloud after years of silent knowing. "But you were working at a grocery store," Melissa blurted, her voice shrill with disbelief. Her perfect composure cracked, showing the calculation beneath. She had seen me scanning groceries, wearing a uniform, accepting minimum wage. It didn't align with the numbers in front of her. "For 3 shifts," I confirmed. "Just long enough for you to see me and report back. Just like I'd planned." I allowed myself a small smile, not of cruelty but of quiet vindication. They had underestimated me completely, seen what they expected to see rather than who I really was. The second folder contained photos. My new house, purchased in cash the previous week, twice the size of my old home, in a gated community across town. 4 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a garden space in the back for the vegetables I enjoyed growing. Everything I wanted, nothing I needed to impress others with. But why? Brandon's voice had lost its confident edge. Why pretend to be struggling? His genuine confusion almost made me pity him. Almost. He truly couldn't comprehend why someone would hide wealth, having spent his life displaying even what he didn't have. "When did you realize she'd been planning this all along?" "Drop a comment with the moment you caught on." "Because I needed to know," I said simply. "For years I suspected what you really thought of me, how you valued what I could give you, not who I am." The truth I had carried silently for so long finally spoke aloud, felt both terrible and freeing, like lancing a wound, painful but necessary for healing. I kept hoping I was wrong, I continued, my voice steady. That's why I never told you about the money. I wanted you to love me for being your mother, not for my bank account. On decades of maternal hope, of giving second chances, of making excuses for increasingly selfish behavior, all distilled into one simple truth. I had wanted my son's love to be genuine. Melissa recovered first, her smile returning with calculated precision. Carrie, this is wonderful news. We should celebrate. And of course, we still want you to move in with us. Her voice was bright, brittle, like glass about to shatter. The mental recalculations almost visible on her face as she tried to salvage the situation. No, I interrupted gently. You wanted me to move in after you learned about the money. 3 weeks ago, you watched me stand in the rain with a suitcase. The contrast hung between us. Her earlier cruelty versus her current fawning. The weather itself bearing witness to the transformation money brought to her treatment of me. Brandon shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you're exaggerating. We were trying to help you become independent after losing your job. Even now, caught in his deception, he couldn't admit the truth, couldn't acknowledge what he had done, who he had become. Amy slid the third document across the table. This is a transcript of your conversation with the real estate agent you contacted the day after Mrs. Lewis signed the house over. Her voice was professional, but her eyes were hard. She had been my friend long enough to feel personally betrayed by my son's actions. I watched my son read his own words. The old lady's out. We can list as soon as the property is cleared. She doesn't need to know the listing price. His face flushed, then paled. His own voice caught on paper, his true intentions laid bare in black and white. The old lady, I repeated softly. 30 years of working multiple jobs to give you everything, and I'm the old lady to be discarded. No accusation, just a statement of fact. The painful reality of how my child saw me, not as a person with feelings, history, identity, but as an obstacle to his financial goals. Brandon's face flushed with angry embarrassment. You spied on me? Had me followed? What kind of mother does that? Deflection, the refuge of those caught in their own misdeeds. Attack rather than acknowledge, accuse rather than apologize. The kind who wanted to be wrong, I answered. The kind who needed absolute confirmation before cutting ties with her only child. My voice cracked slightly on these last words. Despite everything, this was still painful. He was still the baby I had nursed, the child I had raised, the center of my world for decades. The final document was already signed. My new will, leaving everything to a scholarship fund for single mothers. Brandon's name appeared nowhere. Not out of spite, but because trust, once thoroughly broken, cannot be mended with the same materials that failed the first time. You can keep the house, I told him, rising from my chair. Consider it payment for showing me the truth. Sometimes the most expensive lessons are the most valuable. I gathered my purse, straightened my shoulders. This chapter was ending, but my story would continue. Melissa lunged for my arm. Wait! We can fix this! Family sticks together! Her fingers clutched at my sleeve, desperation in her perfectly manicured nails, the money slipping away before she had even gotten her hands on it. We're not family, I corrected her gently. You made that clear when you called me an embarrassment at last year's Christmas dinner, not realizing I was in the next room. I removed her hand from my arm, noticing how her jewelry caught the light. Purchased with whose money, I wondered. What sacrifices of Brandon's had funded her displays of wealth? His jaw dropped. All this time, he'd assumed I knew nothing. That I was the naive mother, easily manipulated. That I hadn't heard the whispers, noticed the glances, felt the growing distance as his true character revealed itself year after year. Can you believe his reaction? Would you forgive a child who treated you this way? Share your thoughts. Mom, please. Brandon tried one last approach. We made a mistake. Everyone deserves a second chance. His voice took on the wheedling tone I recognized from his childhood, the voice he used when caught in misbehavior, trying to avoid consequences. I gave you countless chances, I replied. Each time you called only when you needed something. Each holiday you cut short. Each condescending explanation of things I understood better than you. Years of small betrayals, building to this final break. Not one mistake, but a pattern. Not a temporary lapse, but a revelation of character. I reached the door before turning back. The movers have already transferred my belongings from the apartment to my new house. Amy will provide her contact information for any legal matters. Business concluded. Relationship severed. The cleanest break possible under the circumstances. "You can't just leave!" Brandon's voice cracked, panic replacing confidence. "What about Thanksgiving? Christmas? What will people think?" Always the appearance, never the substance. Worried about the neighbor's opinions, not about losing his mother's love. "They'll think you showed your true character," I answered. "And they'll be right." My final words to my son, not spoken in anger but in sad acknowledgement of what he had become, and what I had enabled through years of excusing the inexcusable. Outside, the autumn air felt clean and new. Amy joined me moments later, linking her arm through mine. The bank's heavy doors closed behind us with a final sounding thud, symbolically closing this chapter of my life. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, guiding me to her car. The question simple, the answer complex. How to summarize the end of a lifetime relationship, the severing of the most fundamental bond. "No," I admitted, "but I will be. For the first time in decades, I'll be living for myself, not for someone who saw me as a resource rather than a person." Grief and liberation mingled in my heart, loss and possibility dancing a complicated waltz in my mind. 3 months have passed since that day at the bank. My new home feels more mine than the old house ever did, perhaps because every choice was made for me, not for Brandon's approval. I've painted the walls in colors I love, hung artwork that speaks to me, created a space that reflects who I am rather than what others expect me to be. He's tried contacting me, first with anger, then with manipulative apologies, finally with financial proposals. I've responded to none. The time for negotiation ended when he called me the old lady and put me out in the rain. Some bridges, once burned, should remain ashes. The house they so eagerly claimed is now a burden. Amy's real estate friends tell me they've listed it, but buyers are scarce. The property taxes he thought I couldn't afford are now his problem. Sometimes natural consequences are the best teachers, though I doubt he's learning the lesson I hoped. Meanwhile, I've started a support group for mothers like me, women who gave everything to children who saw them as financial resources rather than people. The healing happens in recognizing we're not alone, in sharing stories, shedding tears, and gradually reclaiming the selves we lost in the all-consuming role of mother. Last week, I received an invitation to Brandon's home for Thanksgiving dinner. The handwriting was Melissa's, the desperation palpable. My new wealth makes me family again, it seems. The irony isn't lost on me. Rejected when they thought I had nothing. Welcomed back when they discovered my financial worth. I sent a polite decline. My Thanksgiving will be spent with Amy and other friends who stood by me when I appeared to have nothing to offer but my company. People who value my presence, not my presence. Who see my worth beyond my wallet. Sometimes people ask if I miss Brandon. The truth is complicated. I miss who I thought he was. I miss the child I believed I was raising. I don't miss who he revealed himself to be. I grieve for what might have been while accepting what is. The greatest gift I've given myself is freedom from the need for his approval or love. My worth isn't measured by his recognition of it. I am whole without his validation, complete within myself. It took losing my child to find myself. A painful paradox I'm still coming to terms with. Has someone's betrayal ultimately made you stronger? This story resonated with you? Share it with someone who needs to hear it. If there's one lesson I've learned, it's that preparation isn't pessimism. It's self-protection. I always hoped Brandon would prove my suspicions wrong. That the separate account would be unnecessary, the precautions excessive. I wanted to be mistaken about his character more than I wanted to be right. I no longer work as a secretary or a cashier. Instead, I volunteer teaching financial literacy to women starting over. Every class includes a section on creating an emergency fund that no one else knows about. a safety net that belongs to them alone, that can't be manipulated or controlled by others. Not because you expect betrayal, I tell them, but because your security shouldn't depend on others' loyalty. Self-reliance isn't cynicism. It's wisdom born of experience. Trust is beautiful, but verification is essential, especially when the stakes are your future. At 60, I'm finally living the life I helped others achieve while deferring my own dreams. I'm traveling, taking classes, making friends who value me for myself. I'm experiencing the world on my terms, without filtering everything through the lens of maternal sacrifice. The money that Brandon coveted isn't just currency to me. It represents freedom, choices, the power to help others without depleting myself. It's not about wealth for its own sake, but about what that wealth enables: dignity, independence, generosity on my own terms. Last month, I established a scholarship for single mothers returning to school. The first recipient was a woman whose situation mirrored my own 30 years ago, widowed with a young child, struggling to balance work and education, determined to create security for her family. "You saved me," she said, clutching the acceptance letter, tears in her eyes, hope replacing resignation. I shook my head, remembering my own struggles, my own determination. "No," I corrected her. "You saved yourself by asking for help. I'm just providing tools." That's the truth of it. We save ourselves, even when others offer assistance. The courage to change, to grow, to rebuild must come from within. That's the final lesson I've learned. True strength isn't in never needing help. It's in recognizing that receiving support and building resources aren't contradictory. We can be both vulnerable enough to accept assistance and strong enough to protect ourselves from exploitation. My story isn't about revenge, though many see it that way. It's about reclaiming my worth from those who tried to define it by what I could provide them. It's about valuing myself enough to walk away from toxic relationships, even when those relationships are with my own child. I don't know what the future holds. Whether Brandon will ever understand what he lost, whether reconciliation might someday be possible. What I do know is that I'll face that future standing tall, secure in myself, no longer defined by my role as his mother, but by who I am as a complete person. Some days are harder than others. I still catch myself reaching for the phone to call him when I see something that reminds me of his childhood. I still have moments of doubt, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I could have raised him to be someone who valued people over possessions. But then I remember the rain on my face as I stood outside my own home. I remember the old lady comment to the real estate agent. I remember 30 years of increasing selfishness, of calculated neglect, of seeing me as a resource rather than a person. And I know that this ending, painful as it is, was inevitable from the moment he began to see me as a means to an end. Yesterday, one of the women in my support group asked me if I thought forgiveness was possible. Not reconciliation, but forgiveness. Letting go of the anger, releasing the hurt. I told her what I believe. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment. It's about moving forward without the heavy baggage of what might have been. I'm working on that forgiveness every day. Not for Brandon's sake, but for my own. Because carrying anger hurts the carrier more than the target. Because I deserve peace after decades of putting everyone else first. My new living room has large windows that face east. Every morning, I sit there with my coffee and watch the sunrise. The colors change day by day. Sometimes bold oranges and reds, sometimes subtle pinks and purples. Each one is different. Each one is beautiful. Each one reminds me that every day is a fresh start, a new beginning. That's what I'm embracing now. New beginnings, new possibilities. A life that centers around my choices, my priorities, my happiness. Not in a selfish way, but in a self-respecting way. In a way that acknowledges my worth beyond what I can give to others. Would Brandon ever have learned to value me properly if I hadn't taken this drastic step? I don't know. What I do know is that I couldn't continue enabling his entitled behavior, couldn't keep accepting less than I deserved from my own child. My support group continues to grow. Women sharing stories, finding strength in each other's experiences. We laugh together, cry together, build each other up. We remind each other that our worth isn't tied to how others treat us, that our value doesn't depend on external validation. Last week, I helped one of the women open her own separate account. Her hands shook as she signed the paperwork. "My husband checks all our finances," she whispered. "He'll be furious if he finds out." I held her hand, steady and strong. "This isn't about hiding," I told her. "It's about having something that's yours alone, something no one can take from you." She nodded, understanding the difference between secrecy and privacy, between deception and self-protection. The scholarship fund is thriving. 3 more women have received funding for their education. 3 more families moving toward security and independence. It doesn't erase the pain of losing my relationship with Brandon, but it creates meaning from that loss. Something positive growing from something painful. My new neighbors invited me to their holiday gathering next month. No pressure, no expectations, just community and connection. I accepted with gratitude, looking forward to building relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation or manipulation. This is my life now. Not the one I planned, not the one I hoped for, but the one I've chosen with clear eyes and full awareness. There's grief in that choice, but also freedom. There's loss, but also gain. There's endings, but also, and this is what I hold on to most tightly, there are new beginnings. Has this story inspired you? Let me know in the comments and share with someone who needs to remember their own worth isn't defined by others' perception of it.